3 o'clock Friday afternoon. I'm Elijah Campbell. Welcome into the post-game show. Hope everybody had a phenomenal Christmas. I know I did. I'm here in the studio live, coming to you from 3 to 6. My man Ed Bird behind the glass, pressing all the buttons so I don't have to. And that means the show's going to run a whole lot more smoother today than maybe it has over the last, week and a half when I was back there doing the show by myself, and be a little sharper and have a little more fun back here. And I'm not lonely. That's another thing here, too. You know, when you're doing a 3-hour radio show by yourself in studio, sometimes it can get a little lonely, which is why whenever Alan or Jack say they can come in and hang out with me for a couple segments, I'm elated because it's not just me in this empty studio by myself. And today here at our studios, everybody else taking vacation time. So it was kind of quiet here. I was pretty much the only one in the building here for the most part this afternoon preparing for the show. And man, saw Ed Bird walk in, you'd have thought I was Tom Hanks seeing somebody on that island after being deserted for a long time. I was elated. So we're going to have a really fun show today. Again, hopefully everybody had a fantastic Christmas. I know I did. I got to go home to Tennessee, I really got to make my rounds. I got to stay at a friend's house Sunday night. I got there about Sunday afternoon in Antioch, then drove to Jamestown, Tennessee, stayed with my dad for a night, drove to Cookeville, Tennessee to stay with my mom for a night, and then got to hang out, late, with my sister who lives in Hendersonville. I got to see her a little bit during that time frame as well. So I made a tour. I was all over the place here this week, but it's worth it. And then on Sunday morning, I'll be taking my happy rear end down to Orlando, Florida for the Citrus Bowl, which we're going to talk a lot about today. In the second hour, I'll get into more of a deep dive on the Citrus Bowl because we have total clarity on who all is and is not playing for the South Carolina Gamecocks. And spoiler alert, you're going to really like who all is playing for this team because I think it's going to be a pretty advantageous matchup for South Carolina. I don't just really like their chances to beat Illinois. I love their chances to beat Illinois, and I like their chances to obliterate Illinois if the team is motivated coming into it, which it really does seem like they are motivated. But when we look at, the Christmas Day stuff, obviously this is my first time being here since Christmas. There's a lot of sporting events that have happened since then between the NFL, the college football playoff. So this first hour will be a little bit of a review of that. We're going to talk a lot about what happened on Christmas Day in the NFL because there are some fascinating storylines that are kind of happening in the NFL. I did some digging today, and I found an angle that I'm really excited to get to share with you guys as well. And then, of course, the college football playoff. A lot of people were really bent out of shape because there weren't a lot of competitive games, but I feel like that's also just kind of a byproduct of where college football is at right now. I don't know if you changed a lot of those first-round matchups. They would be a lot different, but we'll get into that later on as well. I do want to start off talking about those NFL games on Sunday. It was kind of weird watching a live National Football League game on Netflix, and explaining to my grandparents how to get the game was also kind of a challenge in itself, having to give out my Netflix username and password to some family members. But that was an interesting experience in itself, getting to watch a game live on Netflix. I thought Netflix did a solid job. Obviously, I think a lot of Americans probably watched that game. Maybe not on mute because of the broadcasters, because you have family over. I mean, a lot of times, you're playing Christmas music and everything and like that. That's kind of what it was like at my house, at least, when those games were going on. We kind of had the game on mute and then had some Christmas music playing, but the presentation was good. When I went back and watched some of it, I thought the broadcasting was really good. They had an A+, I would say even an A++ lineup of broadcasters for that game. Ian Eagle, terrific as always. Noah Eagle in the Texans-Ravens game, fantastic as always. That kid is a rising star. But in terms of the football itself, man, the Chiefs just do it again. They do it again. And 11 of their 15 wins this season have come by one score, which is just fascinating to me. And anybody who is really into regression stats, anybody who is overly interested in a lot of the numbers of, what is sustainable over the course of a 17-game regular season and playoffs, things like that, would look at 11 one-score wins and be alarmed by it. Any other team, people would look at that and say, wow, you've won 11 games by one score and you're 15-1. they would think that that's not sustainable, right? It would seem fluky, like a flash in the pan. But this Chiefs team, man, they just kind of redefine those odds. Defensively, they're the best in the NFL right now in terms of points surrendered per game, and they just absolutely smothered Pittsburgh on Wednesday. Sacked Russell Wilson 5 times. He only threw for a hair over 200 yards. They won by 19 points despite really only outgaining the Steelers by 25 total yards. So from a total yard standpoint, it wasn't like they were just outgaining them significantly and Pittsburgh couldn't keep up in terms of just, moving the ball up and down the field. They just couldn't finish a lot of drives. But man, just defensively, this Chiefs team is incredibly impressive. They didn't even have to run the ball very well. They haven't run the ball well all year. I think they're like number 28th run offense in the NFL. But Patrick Mahomes did what Patrick Mahomes does. Travis Kelce's finally woken up from his slumber. He caught a touchdown pass. He caught 8 passes and was even targeted 11 times. And that's something that's kind of mirrored what their offense has looked like over the course of the last few years in this dynastic run that they've had. It was mightily impressive. And there's just one thing, though, about this Kansas City Chiefs offense, and I want to dig into this in the next segment, but I want to go ahead and plant the seed right now in your head to kind of think about if this is something that's really sustainable. But they are a 15-win team. They're 15-1 right now. Very few teams, win at least 15 games in the regular season. Even going 14-2 before the expansion of the regular season was a significant feat. But this Kansas City Chiefs team has 15 wins, and they are outside the top 10 in points per game on offense. They're the number 1 defense in points per game in terms of surrendering very few points. But I want you to think about this right now, and I'll answer this in the next segment. I'll go into it a little deeper. I'll elaborate a little bit more. But in your lifetime, have you ever seen a team win at least 14 games in an NFL regular season, or 15 at that, and be outside the top 10 in scoring offense? Because it almost shouldn't compute. That shouldn't make sense. That shouldn't be a thing that is physically possible, right? If you're winning 15 to 16 games in the National Football League, you should be able to score some points. The Chiefs are one of only like 4 teams in the league this year who haven't scored more than 30 points in a game. Now, they've reached the 30-point threshold twice, but they have not broken past the 30-point threshold. The other teams that haven't scored, I believe, for over 30 points in a game this year, I believe were the Jaguars, the Giants, and the Raiders. And neither of those 3 teams have more than 3 wins. So they showed this graphic on Netflix that the Chiefs are one of 4 teams to not score more than 30 points in a game this year, and they show their record. And one says 14-1, and the others are like 2-13, 2-13, 3-12. It's interesting. The offense hasn't been dazzling from a numbers perspective, yet they're 15-1. So I want you to think about that. Think back in your lifetime, have this hypothesis ready, and think about when in your life have you seen a team win that many games in the regular season, but not rank inside the top 10 in scoring. I do want to get into the Ravens-Texans game. That one was probably the biggest dud, right? I mean, those are two playoff teams featuring Lamar Jackson and C.J. Stroud. Lamar Jackson MVP from last year. I think he probably should win the MVP this season. C.J. Stroud, a rising star in the league. The Texans have been a little disappointing, but the fact they laid the egg they did, not scoring a single offensive point. They had 2 points in the game, and that only came from a safety. So it wasn't like it was some high-octane offense that was being played by the Houston Texans. The Ravens played some great defense, but 34-2, the Ravens absolutely flexed in this game. And I think Lamar Jackson is starting to show his MVP case a little bit when you look at the numbers from a cumulative perspective. 10 for 15 for 168 yards through the air with 2 touchdowns. It's not eye-popping. It's not one of those Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, even peak Patrick Mahomes-esque stat lines, but he did run for 87 yards on only 4 carries with a touchdown, including a big one that was pretty much a backbreaker in that game. He clearly didn't have to do much, because when your defense doesn't give up a point really that one rushing touchdown would have been enough. So he didn't have to do much, and it really does help when Derrick Henry can run for 147 yards and a score on his own. But the more I look at Lamar Jackson's season this year, and we haven't got to talk a ton of NFL on this program just because of the success of South Carolina, the intrigue of a 12-team college football playoff, everything that's going on in collegiate athletics. Jay and I keep it on the college side. So we haven't really got to dig into a lot of the NFL stuff, but I did kind of get to scroll through some numbers on my days off. And when watching the games on Wednesday, specifically the Ravens, in awe of how fun the Baltimore Ravens are. And in pure, I guess, being puzzled as to how they've lost the amount of games they have. And really, it's because the defense has let them down a few times this year. But Lamar Jackson's season is MVP-esque. And when you go on Twitter, you look through social media or listen to a lot of the talking heads, I think the consensus is that Josh Allen is leading the MVP race, but I wouldn't be so sure about that. I mean, let's look at Lamar Jackson in the case that he might have for MVP this season. If he plays in the final game, which I think he might, because all he needs is about 50 yards. He's 50 yards away from a 4,000-yard season. So if he plays even the first half, he should probably break the 4,000-yard threshold. So it'd be a 4,000-yard passing season. He already has what is a pretty insane touchdown-interception ratio of 39-4. 39 touchdown passes. That leads the league. Only 4 interceptions. So he takes care of that ball. And he's still running the ball really well. He's rushed for 852 yards this year, which is already more than last year, and has rushed for 4 touchdowns. And he is leading the league in rushing yards per attempt, quarterback, running back, you name it. He had 18 more rushing attempts last season, but he already has more yards than last season. So he's running the ball a lot more efficiently. He's picking up 6.6 yards a carry. He is the most efficient runner in football, regardless of position. And then when you look at a lot of the other numbers, too, I mean, he's leading the NFL in touchdown passes. Those 39 touchdown passes leads the league. He's also leading the league in adjusted yards per attempt. So it's yards per attempt, but basically accounts for interceptions and touchdowns. That's at 10.31, which is mind-blowing. And he's leading the league in touchdown percentage. So the highest percentage of his passes that lead to touchdowns. 8.8% of Lamar Jackson's passes end with 6 Ravens points. That leads the league by a pretty good chunk. And now Josh Allen's having a great year, too. I don't want to discredit everything that guy's done. He's equally as fun to watch. But there's not, he's thrown 13 less touchdown passes than Lamar Jackson has. He's thrown 2 more interceptions, has run for about 300 fewer yards. But he does have 11 rushing touchdowns, and that's pretty cool for a quarterback, especially if you play fantasy football like I do. He helps you out a lot in that regard with his ability to make magic happen with his legs. And the Bills are really good. They're the only team to beat the Kansas City Chiefs this year. They beat them by multiple scores. So that magical one-score game advantage the Kansas City Chiefs have, it doesn't apply for that. They're 11-0 in one-score games. The only loss came to the Bills by multiple scores. As an MVP candidate, especially considering they've beaten some awesome teams, including the Detroit Lions, who I think are the favorites to win the NFC. And I think I wouldn't be surprised at all if the Detroit Lions win the Super Bowl, which is a sentence I never, ever thought I would say at any point in my life. But when you just look at the numbers, Lamar Jackson's having another spectacular season. I would not be surprised if he wins MVP number 3. Now, how far they go in the playoffs kind of depends on what the Chiefs do, right? They're the team that's 15-1. They beat the Ravens to open up the season. That's an interesting dynamic. We need to see it in the playoffs from Lamar Jackson, maybe a little more than we have, for people to avoid rolling their eyes whenever they hear 3-time MVP Lamar Jackson, because that's very likely. I'd say more likely than not. We'll go take a quick break right here. When we come back, I'll dive into a little bit more about the Kansas City Chiefs and how rare it is for a team to be 15-1, but not rank in the top 10 in points per game. We'll do that and more as you're listening to the postgame show. What better way to start a segment than telling you all about something really fun, a cool opportunity that lies ahead? No, it's not just the Lawyer Lisa Special Teams Contest, which we're still doing that, by the way, because the Gamecocks have yet to score a special teams touchdown this year. They have a game left. So if the Gamecocks score a special teams touchdown and you are entered into the contest, remember, you have to be entered in if you want a chance to win, then you can win up to $1,200 in the drawing if they are able to score by way of special teams touchdown, the Citrus Bowl against Illinois. So that's cool. That's one thing. But also, if you listen in on Monday to the early game from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. with Bill, Preston, and Jen, you can win a chance to win a pair of tickets to the Citrus Bowl. Pretty cool. A chance to spend New Year's Eve in Orlando. A chance to possibly see your beloved Gamecocks pick up win number 10 for only the 5th time in school history. Yeah, pretty cool. And you can win tickets to see that in person in Orlando at the Citrus Bowl. You just got to listen in on Monday morning to the early game and find out how. I believe it's going to be a calling contest. I haven't gotten any other details, but cool opportunities that lie ahead featuring the Citrus Bowl. And before I dive into the Kansas City Chiefs and some of the cool things that I found about the history of a team being 15-1 without being in the top 10 in scoring offense, a wild game going on ESPN right now, and a 2-point conversion attempt. So 6 seconds left. Navy was leading Oklahoma 21-20. They just kicked an onside kick. That's going to be illegal touching on Oklahoma. So Navy is going to come out of the Lockheed Martin Armed Forces Bowl with a win over Oklahoma. So congrats to Navy. That's going to be Navy's 10th win on the season. Navy's going to finish the season 10-3. I believe Army's got 10+ wins too. So Army and Navy both winning 10+ this season. So congrats to those two military academies. Big win for Navy. And you know what? I'm kind of pumped personally because I may or may not have taken my bowl pick'em pool against everybody else who picked Oklahoma. So that's a little personal victory lap for me right there. But Navy about to seal the deal. They're a kneel down away from beating Oklahoma by a score of 21-20. In the last segment, talked a little bit about the Kansas City Chiefs beating the Pittsburgh Steelers, dominating the Pittsburgh Steelers on the scoreboard, 29-10, which is really the stat that matters the most. But the Steelers were competitive in a yards standpoint, but they couldn't protect Russell Wilson as well as the Chiefs protected Mahomes. Mahomes didn't get sacked. Russell Wilson got sacked 5 times. The Chiefs defense did what they do, and they kept the Steelers off the scoreboard, and the Chiefs do what they do, and that's win a game without scoring over 30 points. This is a very interesting Chiefs team. 11 of the 15 wins were decided by one score. They have yet to score more than 30 in a game. They've reached 30 twice. They have not scored more than that in a game. And the only other teams that have yet to do that this year haven't won more than 3 games. So I was doing a little bit of digging today, and I found, I was looking at some of the basic numbers like points per game, points against, and I realized the Kansas City Chiefs are 11th in points per game this year. As of right now, they score 24 points per game, and they give up 18 points per game. They play pretty close games. But it made me wonder, what teams in NFL history have won 15 games, or even 14 for that matter? I'll even allow the 14-win teams here, because before the expansion of the regular season, a hallmark of a great season, obviously you want to win your division games, you dominated your schedule. And usually those involve some of the best offenses in the NFL. The Kansas City Chiefs in 2022 won 14 games. They were first in points per game. The 2022 Eagles that year also won I believe they won 14 games. They were third in points per game. And I went back and just kept looking through the years and anytime I saw a 14 or 15 win team, I just looked to see where they ranked in points per game. It took me until I got to 2004, where I ran into the Pittsburgh Steelers, and this was Ben Roethlisberger's rookie year, where they were 15-1, and they were also, just like the Kansas City Chiefs this year, 11th in points per game. It's very rare. I counted a lot of teams on here. The 2004 Patriots were 4th. The 2005 Colts were 2nd. The 2006 Chargers were 1st. The 2007 Patriots were 1st. Duh, they went undefeated in the regular season. The 2009 Colts were 7th, a little bit lower. The 2010 Patriots were 1st. The 2011 Packers were 1st by a wide margin. The 2015 Panthers, offensive coordinated by Mike Shula, 1st in the NFL in points per game. The 2016 Patriots were 3rd. The 19 Ravens were 1st. The 2020 Chiefs were 6th. So all those teams won at least 14 games in the regular season, but were all at least in the top 7 in points per game. This Kansas City Chiefs team and the 2004 Pittsburgh Steelers team are very similar. They both were 11th in the NFL in points per game on offense. They were number 1 in the NFL in points against per game. So in terms of scoring defense, they both led the league, and by a pretty decent margin too. This Chiefs team is number 1 at 18 points per game surrendered. That 2004 Steelers team only gave up 15 points per game. They were dominant. One interesting difference, though, again, back to the one-score game thing, the one thing that I think, if anything, bites the Chiefs in the rear end this year, it's that they might have some bad luck when it comes to regression to the mean in one-score games. That Steelers team was 6-0 in one-score games, but they only played 6. Played 16 games, 6 of those were one scores, were decided by a score. This Chiefs team has 11 of those 15 games decided by one score. Really, that's the only big difference, except the Steelers had a rookie quarterback and the Chiefs have a multi-time MVP quarterback who's won 3 Super Bowls already and is trying to win a 4th this season and be the first to three-peat in that regard. So I just found it interesting. This is a very, I will say at times, underwhelming Kansas City Chiefs offense from what we've seen in previous years, before teams just really started going with a too high safety look on them, and Patrick Mahomes was able to sling the ball down the field and dazzle us with his arm strength. You haven't seen a lot of that this year. Now, they are first in the league in terms of time per drive. So they do sustain some long drives because they have to keep the ball in front of the defense, because every defense that plays them is going to make sure that they don't get beat over the top with Patrick Mahomes, again, his incredible arm strength. But they haven't converted into a ton of points, and they're 28th in the league in rushing offense. 28th. There are only 32 teams in the National Football League. Only 4 teams run the ball worse on a per-game basis than the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs are 15-1. They get in these close games, and Patrick Mahomes just knows how to win them. It's interesting. But for those who don't remember the 2004 Steelers, they didn't play in the Super Bowl. Their luck eventually ran out. They played the Patriots in the AFC Championship game and got smacked up to the tune of 41-27. Now, 34 of those points were scored on offense. One was an 87-yard pick six from Rodney Harrison on Ben Roethlisberger, and they won going away pretty easily. It wasn't a very competitive game from start to finish. But that's how that Steelers team ended. Again, there is a big difference, though. That was quarterbacked by a rookie in Ben Roethlisberger, who in that AFC Championship game finally played like a rookie and threw 3 picks. The Chiefs have Patrick Mahomes, who's already won 3 Super Bowls, multiple MVPs, and is widely regarded as the best quarterback in the NFL right now. And I don't really know of any arguments to combat that. So an interesting comparison. Only once, or the last time that somebody has won 15 games in the regular season but was outside the top 10 in scoring offense, was 2004, 20 whole years ago. We'll go take a quick break. I'll give you my biggest takeaways from the first round of a 12-team college football playoff. And I think that there were a couple teams that made some pretty interesting statements with the wins that they had, and set up what I think is going to be an exciting weekend of college football playoff games, or exciting week of them coming up. You're listening to the Postgame Show. Welcome back to the post-game show. I'm Elijah Campbell, no Jay Phillips today. We got some early football coming on today. That's one of my favorite parts about this time of the year is that we get some really fun daytime football. We just had a really exciting game in the Lockheed Martin Armed Forces Bowl between Oklahoma and Navy. Navy pulls off the win, 21-20. I think that makes Oklahoma the first team in the SEC to lose a bowl game this season, and that means Brent Venables goes 6-7 this year. I think this is his second. If I'm not mistaken, this is his second 6-7 season as the head coach of the Oklahoma Sooners. I believe they went 6-7 his first year, went 6-6, lost to Florida State in the bowl game. So I want to say this is the second time that he's gone 6-7. I will look that up during the break just to fact check myself, but things not great with Brent Venables in Oklahoma right now. And if he didn't have such a large buyout, I think there'd be a little more hot seat discussion. His best season right now wasn't. He did give him a 10-win season last year. They went 10-3. I believe they won the bowl game to get them to 10-3. Very disappointing for Oklahoma and Brent Venables this year. I know they had a lot of injuries, especially in the wide receiver front, but still a season where Oklahoma, you think about it, this time last year we were talking about how's Jackson Arnold going to look in the Alamo Bowl against Arizona, and how's he going to look, how's the future going to look for Oklahoma because he'll be the quarterback of the future. Dylan Gabriel last year, after the season he had with Oklahoma, which is a fantastic one, hit the transfer portal and then goes to Oregon. They let him walk, I think, assuming that Jackson Arnold was the guy of the future. Arnold now heading to play at Auburn after 1 year as a starter at Oklahoma, and the Sooners go 6-7. So a lot of soul searching needing to be done in Norman in terms of how that program moves forward with it. But a lot of interesting games over the college football playoff to start. It was our first ever first ever, let me try to word this correctly, first round in a 12-team playoff. There you go, Elijah. Words. Just think about it a little bit. A lot of blowouts. There weren't, I don't believe, any underdog that they didn't win. They also didn't cover the spread. It wasn't pretty at all for a lot of those games. But I think a lot of that was more to do with how good the teams are that hosted and how much of a home field advantage you still have. Like, it's different, right? With the bowl games, or not the bowl games, the playoff games, they're kind of being treated like the home teams do in the NCAA baseball tournament, where teams that host still, the away team has to have like their hype video played. They get, a larger ticket allotment for visitors. And if you watch the Tennessee-Ohio State game, there were a lot of Tennessee fans in attendance. A lot of them. College game day was more Tennessee fans than Ohio State fans. Still didn't matter. Ohio State still had a decent advantage. Home field advantage matters a lot. And the teams that hosted games are also just really bleeping good. Penn State's still really good. Now, I think they might run into some trouble against Boise State in the next round. But Notre Dame especially is one I think that a lot of people are just now figuring out is really good. The strength of schedule wasn't phenomenal, and they had some teams on there that underperformed, but they crushed a lot of the teams they played after that embarrassing loss to Northern Illinois. They lost to Northern Illinois, who a solid MAC team, but a team that like Notre Dame has no business losing to that bunch. Let's be honest with ourselves, right? It was the most embarrassing loss anybody's had in college football this season. And it was the worst loss of any team that was in the field of 12 for the college football playoff. But after that, Notre Dame just beat the hell out of everybody. And they did so by playing fantastic defense. Notre Dame's really good. And I know a lot of people were watching that game last week. It was a week from today. So last Friday, a lot of people were watching because they wanted to hate watch Indiana. Right? They wanted to watch Indiana prove that they had no business being in the college football playoff, yada, yada, yada. And the takeaway became that Indiana was undeserving because they lost to Notre Dame like this. A lot of people have lost to Notre Dame like this. This Notre Dame defense is one of the best in the country. Top 5 in points against. They force a ton of turnovers. And on the line of scrimmage, they bully a lot of teams. They bullied Indiana on the line of scrimmage. Go back and watch that 98-yard touchdown run by Jeremiah Love. The blocking was textbook. There was some teach tape being done on that offensive line and on the edges with the wide receivers and tight ends. They had a wide receiver and tight end on the left side who laid some incredible blocks to open up a hole for Jeremiah Love to basically run 98 yards untouched into the end zone. Notre Dame is really, really good, y'all. And I think that game against Georgia is going to be really close. There's no Carson Beck, so Georgia's offense is going to be pretty limited. And Notre Dame's defense is really good. Elite, I would say. Xavier Watts is a safety who got interception in that Indiana game. One of the best safeties in college football. I think Notre Dame wins that game. Still wouldn't be surprised if Georgia was somehow able to string together a way to win the game despite having Gunnar Stockton at quarterback and Notre Dame having a full week to prepare for Gunnar Stockton. I think one of the reasons why they were able to still win the SEC championship game was because the element of Gunnar Stockton, I don't say took Texas by surprise, but Texas wasn't prepared for it, right? They weren't prepared for Carson Beck to get hurt right before halftime and have to play against somebody they've never seen. There's a little bit of tape out there on Gunnar Stockton. I don't think Georgia's going to try to make him do too much. I think Georgia's going to try to rely heavily on that defense and play the defense and field position game, as they probably should, because Georgia's got an elite defense too. That's a game of two elite defenses. And really, that game, I think, is just going to be decided on how well Riley Leonard's able to move the ball through the air. Notre Dame, Georgia's going to be a lot of fun on New Year's Day, y'all. That one's going to be really fun. But one of the biggest takeaways is the fat L that I took by picking Tennessee to beat Ohio State. That one was not remotely close. And that was probably one of the worst ass kickings that we got in a weekend full of them. An incredible stat from that game, because here is the advantage I thought Tennessee would have, and that was going to be on some of the line of scrimmages, especially Ohio State's offensive line compared to Tennessee's offensive line. I was just for sure Tennessee would be able to protect Nico Iamaleava a lot better than Ohio State was able to protect Will Howard, because Ohio State is down a couple of tackles. Their starting center, Seth McLaughlin, is out for the year. They are duct taping together that offensive line. Tennessee's, for the most part, fully healthy. They just weren't any good. Ohio State only blitzed Tennessee on 9% of snaps. 9. On 9% of the snaps, Ohio State blitzed an extra player. But they still got pressure on Nico Iamaleava, 43% of his dropbacks. Again, 9% blitz rate. They were able to pressure him 43% of his dropbacks. They didn't have to blitz anybody at all, and they rarely did, and it didn't matter. Nico Iamaleava threw 14. He only completed 14 of his 31 passes because he was under pressure and under fire the entire game. They made him see ghosts, and that was a huge advantage. That's why Tennessee couldn't score until late in the first half. And then on the other side, even with Ohio State's duct taped together offensive line, Will Howard was protected. He only got pressured on 25% of his dropbacks, and he threw for 311 yards and picked Tennessee's secondary apart. Then in the battle of Ohio State receivers versus Tennessee's secondary, it wasn't even close. Oh, yeah, the Jeremiah Smith kid's pretty good too. The true freshman who, you know, if he entered the draft today, is probably a first-rounder. I don't know if he's the first wide receiver pick, but he's probably a first-rounder. He's a true freshman. He's got to play college football for 2 more years after this. I just found that interesting, that Ohio State beat the hell out of them the way they did, and I think that kind of showed something, is that Ohio State is part of that upper crust of college football. There's a reason that roster cost them about $20 million estimated. I've seen that number floated around, that it was about a $20 million roster Ohio State put on the football field this year. That even when that Ohio State offensive line had to be duct taped together and seen a lot of injuries and had to have next man up, play big minutes, play big snaps, they were able to do that and do it adequately. It shows the level of depth that an Ohio State has that a Tennessee does not. And Tennessee was the 3rd place team in the SEC. This Ohio State team is really, really good. And I think this also proves that loss against Michigan is definitely more fluky than anything, right? The loss against Michigan is definitely a mental block that the Ohio State Buckeyes have, that they just can't get past. That really just proves that loss is more inexplicable, unexplainable than I think we could have even fathomed at the time. Ohio State felt like a dead program walking going into a first-round game of the college football playoff, having to play a 10-win SEC team, a team that beat Alabama earlier in the season, a team with a really good defense and a top 10 scoring offense, and Ohio State beat the brakes off of them for 4 quarters. That is the biggest message anybody sent in the first round of the college football playoff. Coming back up, On the other side of the break here, another legendary college basketball coach calls it quits, but his explanation rings very hollow to me, and I don't want to hear it. I'll tell you who that is when the postgame show rounds out hour number 1. My biggest pet peeve in college sports just occurred yesterday. And it's from another college basketball head coach, a prominent college basketball head coach who decides to call it quits at a terrible time. And their excuse for it is the state of modern college athletics. Now, look, I'll preface it with this. Yes, coaching college basketball and college football or any college sport really, is harder now than it ever has been with the advent of the transfer portal, with NIL having to be able to manage what players make and having to change the way you recruit, if you have to at all. Some people have been doing this for a while. But it's added a different element to this game that a lot of these coaches didn't sign up for when they started, and I get that. But we've been fully immersed in transfer portal and NIL culture in college athletics since 2021. It's almost 2025. We've been doing this for almost 4 years now. This is nothing new. So when you say that the reason Coach K retired is because of this, okay, whatever, sure. Jay Wright, okay, sure. Didn't sign up for it. Don't want to have to deal with it. Okay. And earlier this year, I was highly critical of Tony Bennett deciding to step down because of this, despite signing a contract extension to coach Virginia for, 3 more years this summer and to commit himself to his basketball team for a few more years. He knew that NIL and transfer portal was a thing. He's been, fully immersed in it himself. But 3 weeks before the season started, you decide to quit and basically trap your team in there to play at Virginia, even though they go to Virginia to play for Tony Bennett, the national championship winning head basketball coach. I thought that was pretty lame. But something lamer happened yesterday, and that's Miami head coach Jim Larrañaga, who's a Hall of Fame head coach and is probably the most underappreciated college basketball head coach in a while. I mean, how many coaches, to begin with, take multiple schools to a Final Four? And then the 2 schools you took to a Final Four were George Mason and Miami. It's a pretty remarkable career that he's had. But there was news breaking that Miami and Jim Larrañaga were in talks to part ways, right? And to do so in the middle of the season. And it's not because, really, you don't talk to a head coach about stepping away in the middle of the season if things are going well, right? Usually you talk about a head coach leaving if things are really bad. And they are really bad at Miami right now. They're 4-8. And they're 0-1 in conference play. And they haven't played particularly well at all. Last year was a very disappointing season. They finished under 500. So after the Final Four season, they slowly got worse. And now it's looking like an absolute disaster of a season for the Miami Hurricanes on the basketball floor. But he explained why he said he chose to step down at Miami. Here's a quote. This is from On3 Sports, a story about it. Quote, "What shocked me beyond belief was after we made it to the Final Four just 18 months ago, the very first time I met with the players, 8 of them decided they were going to put their name in the portal and leave. I said, 'Don't you like it here?' 'No, I love it. I love Miami. It's great. But the opportunity to make money someplace else created a situation that you need to begin to ask yourself as a coach, what is this all about?'" And that rings pretty hollow to me. Because when he took George Mason to the Final Four, he decided later on to take his talents elsewhere as a head coach. And I don't think that there was he stayed at George Mason for a while. He went to the Final Four in 2006, took him to 2 more NCAA tournaments, and then in 2012 decided to go to Miami. So he stayed for a while, but ultimately he was going to be a hot commodity in every coaching cycle because of his success at George Mason. And then he decided to leave. Before George Mason, he was at Bowling Green. In 1997, he had a 21-win season at Bowling Green and then decided to leave for George Mason and take another job. He's changed schools a few times. And he's mad at players for wanting to change schools. And here's the thing, too. Here's what rings the most hollow to me. Not just Jim Larrañaga in terms of him moving schools and the hypocrisy there. But he didn't mind the NIL and transfer portal publicly when it helped him win. Miami went to the Final Four with a starting lineup of 3 transfer portal players. Nigel Pack was a transfer portal player from Kansas State who Miami paid a lot of money to. Jordan Miller was a starter, ironically enough, from George Mason, who came over and was one of the leading scorers on that team. Norchad Omier, a player who now is at Baylor, was one of the best offensive rebounders in the country at Arkansas State. He had zero problem with NIL, with transfer portal players, when it benefited him. Because when he had all those players together, they had a 29-win season. Again, they made it to the Final Four. That was a team that upset Texas to get to the Final Four. This is the best basketball team in Miami's program's history. He was very successful with it that year. And yes, he said a lot of players wanted to leave, and a few players from that team did leave. Norchad Omier stayed last year. But Harold Beverly went to Indiana. Anthony Walker left. A few of those players that were on the bench left. But there's something that's really annoying to me about quitting halfway through the season because of something that you knew was in place for the last 4 years and something that not only you knew was in place for the last 4 years, but a system that you benefited from. So when he complains about the state of college athletics, it's going to ring hollow to me. Hour number 2, the postgame show, coming right up. Hour number 2 of the post-game show starts right now. My man Jack Veltri going to join me here in about 30 minutes or so. We're going to break down the Citrus Bowl game just a little bit. Wanted to start out, though, talking about this depth chart, because the depth chart has been released, so now we officially know who is and who is not playing in this game, right? We saw the news about a week or two ago that Kyle Kennard was opting out of the bowl game. He will not be playing in the Citrus Bowl, the Nagurski Award winner for the best defensive player in college football. He won't be playing. And then there was speculation. Shane Beamer said there's another player who is kind of weighing his options 50-50 on whether or not they're going to play. And it seems to be, just by, using our logic here, that player was Rocket Sanders. Rocket Sanders is not on the depth chart. So it seems as if that Rocket Sanders will not be playing. He did declare for the NFL draft as well, but in that draft declaration, he didn't really say what his status was for the bowl game. So that was still kind of up in the air until the depth chart was released about a day or two ago. And of course, Rocket Sanders is not on there, but this depth chart's a beauty. For a team that just won 9 games in the SEC, that is going into a bowl game that is not a college football playoff bowl game, a team with a bunch of NFL players on its defense, this is an exciting depth chart. Obviously, a lot of the players that are not draft eligible that are going to be back next year are going to be playing. Lenore Sellers, obviously top of the quarterback depth chart, duh. Robbie Ashford still on the depth chart, and I thought that was one of the more interesting things that Shane Beamer's done with this team is allow Robbie to still play for them going into the bowl game. Last week, I talked about how I thought that was one of my favorite things in stories in the transfer portal is for this offseason are the coaches who allow certain players who are leaving to stay and play for the bowl game and then leave after the bowl game. I think that's kind of a mutually beneficial thing because, if some players can help you win your bowl game, then it makes your season look better. You have a little more momentum going into next year, and then you can leave without really burning a bridge if you're that player. And it helps them be seen by more, right? Like a player like Robbie Ashford. Let's say South Carolina gets up 30 and we're in the third quarter and you're cruising to a win. You let Robbie Ashford come in, get a couple really good snaps, put a little more tape out there, and then maybe some teams that have been looking at him, if he's not decided where he's going to go play yet, a couple teams can look and say, hey, well, we'd love you in our system. It helps the player get a little more tape out there, and maybe they can have a little easier decision on where they end up playing. But Robbie Ashford in the transfer portal, but is playing for South Carolina right now, and played a cut last week too that Shane talked about having to still continue to be a team player, give 100% effort in practices, really paraphrasing here, but give great effort in practices and show that he's here for the team, and it seems like he's done that because he is on this depth chart going into the game. At running back, Juju McDowell and Oscar Attaway are the two names right there, and that's where the giveaway that Rocket will not be playing in this game. So really, offensively, you're almost the same everywhere else. Wide receiver, Mazeo Bennett, starting at one spot with Peyton Mangrum or Luke Doty. Also, a wide receiver, Gage Larvadan or Vandrevius Jacobs. And then the offensive line, the exact same as it was for almost every game this season. Josiah Thompson's going to be at left tackle, Kamar Bell at left guard, Rashawn Lee at center, Torricelli Simpkins at right guard, and then at right tackle, Kason Henry. So you're at full strength on the offensive line. At tight end, Josh Simon, eligible to play in this game. And then Brady Hunt also on the depth chart as well as Michael Smith and Maurice Brown. Exciting to see Josh Smith get one more go at it, too, because a player like Josh Smith probably could have opted out because he has no more eligibility. And if he wanted to save, himself for the NFL draft, he could, but he's opting in. He will be playing. And then the defensive line, you'll be minus Kyle Kennard, but on one edge rush position, Shane has listed Brian Thomas Jr. or Gilbert Edmond or Desmond Umeozulu. Defensive line, you have Tonka Hemingway or TJ Sanders, and then Monkel Goodwine behind both of them. Defensive line, Alex Huntley, and then Nick Barrett or DeAndre Jules behind him. And then on the other edge position, you have Dylan Stewart and then Brian Thomas Jr. below him or JT Gear. And those are the few of the players that I'm really interested in watching, and we'll get into that here in just a second. But going down the list as well, your Mike linebackers, Demetrius Knight Jr., and then J.R. Johnson, your Will linebackers, Debo Williams and Bam Martin Scott. And then secondary at nickel, Jalen Kilgore will be getting the start, and he'll be returning next year as well. Kelvin Hunter or Jalewis Solomon. And then at corner, you'll have O'Donnell Fortune, Emery Floyd backing him up, or David Spalding. And at free safety, Nick Emenwari, who can definitely declare for the draft. We still haven't heard anything about, I guess at least I haven't seen anything about his intentions on leaving a year early or not. This could be his final game as a South Carolina Gamecock because, as we've reminded you pretty frequently on these airwaves, Mel Kiper Jr. has him as the number 2 safety in this draft class. And not only is he going to get drafted if he declares this year, I think he gets drafted in the first 2 rounds. Maybe the third if another safety kind of emerges. But I really like Nick's chances of being a top 2 round pick in the NFL draft. Strong safety, DQ Smith getting the start, Peyton Williams behind him. And then the other corner, Judge Collier getting the start. And then, of course, our specialists, the same as they've been all season long. But with that being said, I mean, obviously you have like a 95% in terms of the number of players that you've had this year playing in this game. You're not beat up by any means. The health has been really good. It's as healthy as you're going to be because you have not played a game since November. You get pretty much an entire month between your last game and now. And you're just minus your running back and your star edge rusher, but Dylan Stewart being on the other side is going to help out a lot. I'm really intrigued to see how the edge rusher opposite of Dylan Stewart looks. Because some of these are guys that can play next year. Desmond Umeozulu is one of those guys who can maybe take that spot next season, right? Maybe can take the spot that Kyle Kennard is leaving. So I'm interested to see exactly who takes advantage of this. Who in this Illinois game takes advantage of being that opposite edge of Dylan Stewart? Because Dylan Stewart will attract a ton of attention in this game. I'd be surprised if Illinois isn't doing a lot of max protect, isn't throwing a tight end there to chip block Dylan Stewart or a running back to chip block him. They're going to have a lot of attention because if you put one of these Illinois offensive linemen, one of these tackles, who some of them have not been great this year, some of them have been prone. The more I look at this game, I see there's a weak link on the offensive line for Illinois, and that'll be Melvin Priestley, who I think is the weak link to it. He gave up a ton of pressures this year, especially against teams that had really good pass rushes like Penn State, Michigan, Rutgers. Had bad games in those. And I think if he gets the assignment of having to block Dylan Stewart, it might get ugly. He's going to have a lot of help. But next year, Dylan Stewart's going to be back, so you're going to need somebody to really take the reins of playing the role Kyle Kennard did in terms of getting to the quarterback and maybe having more advantageous matchups on the line of scrimmage. So Desmond Umeozulu, again, one of those players I'm really looking at. JT Gear and Brian Thomas. A lot of those guys are going to have to really show something to me in those games. One of those guys will have to show something to me in this game against Illinois in the Citrus Bowl. Do they take another edge rusher in the transfer portal? Maybe. I don't know how many out there are Kyle Kennards, right? Last year, you got Kyle Kennard in the transfer portal from Georgia Tech. He comes in and makes an immediate impact and wins all these awards and is one of the best defensive players in the country. I don't think there's that in the transfer portal right now that's available to you. So it would be really convenient if you can get one of these guys to step up and play a role that is even half as productive as to what Kyle Kennard was able to give you. That's something to look for in this game, right? What Dylan Stewart looks like or what Illinois does to him in terms of double teaming him, throwing extra attention, more blockers at him, and how South Carolina's other edge rusher, no matter who it is, handles that and is able to get to Luke Altmaier, the quarterback for Illinois. On offense, I think the offense is going to look pretty similar to what it did the rest the season prior. I think it's going to be a heavy rushing attack. I think Oscar Adaway is going to get a lot of carries. I think we're going to see some Juju McDowell action as well in terms of handoffs out of the backfield. Really excited to ask Jack what he thinks about this too in terms of just how the offense looks. He'll join us at 4:30. He was at the practice today. They've had some on-site practices now, and Jack was able to observe a little bit of that today. So he's got some notes that you could find on GamecockCentral.com. And, of course, he'll share them with me as well. But offensively, how much different is the running game going to look? I think we'll get a little bit of a sneak peek as to what it might look like next year If Oscar Attaway ends up being the number one running back going into next season, how does that look? How is he going to look as a number one back? He shared a lot of snaps well, obviously Rocket took the majority of the snaps this year, but when he was at North Texas, he shared a lot of snaps and a lot of reps with other running backs for the Mean Green. Never really been in a position to be, I guess, the number one runner, and this could be his chance to be able to do that. I would like to see what he does with that opportunity because he's getting the exact same offensive line he's had all year. You don't have offensive line opt-outs or injuries, so you're rolling with the same unit that you've rolled with since the Old Dominion game. The familiarity should be there. I expect him to be pretty productive. And then with Juju McDowell, it being his last game as a South Carolina Gamecock, how much of the ball do you give him? How do you use him? I'd like to see him in the passing game a little bit, kind of as a gadget guy in this game. But you're going to have to make up for a lot of the production that Rocket Sanders would normally have. And towards the last 6 weeks of the season, Rocket was incredibly productive. So that's some stuff to look out for as well. But if you're reading this depth chart and you're a Carolina fan, you have to be excited with all the names on there, especially TJ Sanders, who I think will be a top 3 round draft pick in the NFL, maybe 1. I could see him being a first rounder, but he's back. Nick Emmanwori's back. Debo Williams, Demetrius Knight, as we talked about last week, have opted into playing in this game. Tonka Hemingway. You got a lot of buy-in on this defense, and I expect them to really put a number on Illinois on that side of the ball on New Year's Eve. And just looking at this game from an X's and O's standpoint, from a football perspective, just by the more I look, do a little research on Illinois, I do think this defense can probably hold Illinois to under 14 points. I feel really optimistic about that. Again, Illinois has shown some holes this year when they play against teams with great pass rushes. In the Big Ten, you have some defenses that are kind of like South Carolina's when it comes to getting to the quarterback. Michigan, according to Pro Football Focus, had the number 1 pass rush grade in the country all season long. South Carolina was number 2. And Michigan got to Luke Altmaier a lot. Penn State got to Luke Altmaier a lot. Illinois only scored 7 points in that game. Penn State swarmed them. And Illinois could not get anything going on offense and could not put the ball in the end zone. And then when you look at an offensive lineman or a tackle like Melvin Priestley, as a transfer from Grambling State, has come over to play for Illinois this season, is probably the weak link of that offensive line. And when you're playing a team like South Carolina, your weak link can't be the tackle because you're playing a slew of quality, talented edge rushers. And if Melvin Priestley has to face Dylan Stewart, then God bless him. Good luck. Priestley's given up almost 20 pressures this season and had some of his worst graded games against the best pass rushing units they've played this year. Michigan, Penn State, Rutgers. It's going to take a Herculean effort to keep these Carolina edge rushers out of that backfield. And then on offense for Illinois, they did lose Pat Bryant, who was their leading receiver. Was a great yards after catch guy, was the leading receiver overall, and between him and Zachary Franklin, they accounted for 105 of Illinois' 200 receptions on the year. Now, Zachary Franklin got targeted a lot more than Pat Bryant did. Pat Bryant has declared for the draft because he does have draft eligibility and can be a pretty solid receiver. But when you look at some of the numbers for this team, too, Zachary Franklin's got a lot of drops. That's one of the reasons why Pat Bryant has more catches than he does, because Franklin's dropped about 12 passes this season. It's a lot. So how does Illinois kind of account for that? They're going to have some guys step up. When you look at this matchup, Illinois is the team that has the bigger question marks on who can step up to fill the roles of the players who are not playing. I've got a lot more confidence in South Carolina being able to replace the production of Rocket Sanders and Kyle Kennard than I currently do of Illinois and Pat Bryant. This definitely seems like a matchup that favors the Gamecocks. And, of course, you listen in on Monday at the early game, you could possibly win you have a chance to win tickets to that game and see South Carolina try to get win number 10. Spoiler alert, I like their chances. Coming up on the other side, there was some big news regarding the Gamecocks and the transfer portal, some big additions. What that means for next year's team, we'll discuss when the postgame show returns. quick update on a few SEC games that have happened today, or one that has happened, one that is currently happening before we get Jack Feltry on with us at 4:30. Navy beats Oklahoma 21-20. Fascinating game there. Oklahoma scores a touchdown with 6 seconds left, and then they have the decision to go for the extra point and take it to overtime, or to be able to go for 2 and have a chance of winning the game. They decide to go for 2, and Navy gets a sack. They don't recover the onside kick, and Navy beats Oklahoma. Oklahoma slides to 6-7, finishes the year at 6-7. Another disappointing season for Brent Venables at Oklahoma comes to a sad end as Navy gets win number 10, so that's pretty cool for them. And then today, if you're watching on ESPN right now, Georgia Tech taking on Vanderbilt in the Birmingham Bowl. Probably the game that includes the 2 highest cumulative SAT and ACT scores. Is now tied up. Vanderbilt scored on their first drive, and then Georgia Tech just now scores a touchdown pass. Haynes King dumps it off to a tight end here. Georgia Tech just kicks the extra point, so that is tied at 7 really early on in the second quarter. So I'll keep you updated to that game as it goes on throughout the day, and a lot of other games going on tonight too. I know Syracuse and Washington State is tonight. The Holiday Bowl between Texas A&M and Southern Cal is tonight. I fully expect A&M to have their way with Southern Cal. I think that one's going to be a win for the SEC. But bad start so far to the Southeastern Conference today with Oklahoma, and we'll see if Vanderbilt can kind of rectify that a little bit as the day goes on. But there was some big news with the Gamecocks in terms of what the roster looks like for 2025. You're losing a lot of pieces. You're losing Kyle Kennard, Rocket Sanders for sure. We don't know if TJ Sanders is declaring for the NFL draft. We don't know if Nick Emenwari is declaring for the NFL draft. You lose Josh Simon at tight end. You lose some players, some more players on defense that are impact players. So you're going to have to replenish a lot of these. And yesterday over the holiday break, they get 3 commitments from Aaron Oland, quarterback from Ohio State. Offensive lineman Rodney R.J. Newsome from Western Kentucky, and Miles Norwood, the corner from Ball State. I think, honestly, the 2 interesting ones, Miles Norwood's going to fill a role. Didn't really pop in terms of the trading card numbers, but had good coverage grades at Ball State. And as a player, I think can help you. I think he can help South Carolina next year. To what degree, I don't know yet. Still need to watch more film on him, but I'm more interested, at least as of now, where we sit on December 27th at 4:23. I'm more interested in what the first 2 can bring. Now, Rodney Newsome at Western Kentucky, 6'3", 303 pounds, I think can start right away. I think we'll see him as a starting guard for this South Carolina team. You lose Kamar Bell, who you picked up in the transfer portal from Florida Atlantic. You lose Rashawn Lee, who played center, but he's been your center for a while, a mainstay. He's gone. And then Torricelli Simpkins, who you brought in to be the right guard this year from North Carolina Central, who was probably the most underrated transfer portal pickup on the team this year. The offensive line struggled at times, but the run blocking became really good, and Kamar Bell and Torricelli Simpkins were really good run blockers, and that paved the way for you to have a really good rushing season this year. Him and Bell both, 2 very big pickups, and now they're both gone. They were rentals, 1-year rentals. Rodney Newsome comes in. He will be about a 1-year rental, I believe, as well. I don't know how much eligibility he's got in front of me here. But from Western Kentucky, he's a guard who can come in and have a chance to play right away, and who really seems to excel in pass blocking. Now, according to Pro Football Focus, he has an 81.7 pass block grade, which is very high. Exceptional for Western Kentucky in an offense where they drop back and throw the ball a lot. This is a Western Kentucky team that had a really successful season, and a team that really competed in that conference. But he only gave up 6 pressures all season long, 1 sack. That came against Kennesaw State, ironically enough, probably the worst team on their schedule, or one of. But he had a really solid season, played a lot of snaps, 706 snaps this past year. The run block grade's at a 67.9, but with Lenora Sellers at quarterback, I think one of the biggest objectives this team's going to have is protecting him back there when he does drop back to pass, because we know what Lenora Sellers can do when the pocket breaks down. You just don't want to have to put him in a position to pull the rabbit out of his hat each time. Yes, it is fun to watch. Yes, the Clemson game, I think we've all gone back and rewatched 1,000 times because of Lenora Sellers' magic, the wizardry that he displayed. But I'm sure Shane Beamer and that offensive coaching staff would like to not have to see the pocket break down that many times. And step one to improving your offensive line in terms of pass protection when you're losing 3 of your starters is to bring in an experienced player who excelled at pass blocking at the group of 5 level. I love that. I think in terms of fulfilling a need, this was the best pickup they've had so far. And especially since Andrew Jones backed out on his commitment, I thought that would have been a home run hit for South Carolina, the kid from Grambling State who committed to South Carolina and then last second decided to sign with Ole Miss. Still kind of bugged about that. I guess the word commitment means something different for different people, but for me, that would mean you would go play for that school. But whatever. That's beside the point. But in terms of fulfilling a need that you are going to have on this football team, offensive line, and experience in the offensive line is going to be one. I think you're still going to have to lean in on a lot of those players that you've recruited through the high school ranks. Guys like Cam Pringle to be able to step up and be able to get some playing time next year and help out the team that way. Because I do like the transfer portal to enhance your offensive line, but not to completely build it through the transfer portal. Because offensive line is such a position group that requires some continuity. And if you are completely rebuilding through it every year, you don't really get that, and then you're going to have some slower starts to the season. And as we've seen, when it comes to wanting to make the college football playoff, the games that matter in August and September count every bit as much as the ones that are played in October and November. An addition like R.J. Newsome kind of helps you get into that zone of your offensive line being a little more ready on day one. But when you're filling the interior part of the line, I like R.J. Newsome as a guy who's a really good pass blocker, an ace pass blocker and pass protection player. The Aaron Noland one's interesting from a standpoint of looking into the future, right? You've recruited a lot of quarterbacks the last couple of years. Dante Reno you brought in last season. You brought in this year Cutter Woods, the standout from Westside. Almost won back-to-back state titles, was dangerously close to winning back-to-back state titles, and arguably the best pocket passer in the state of South Carolina at the high school ranks. One of the 2 or 3. But Aaron Noland, a former 4-star or 5-star, depending which website you look at. I look at both 24/7 and On3 and Rivals. But depending on which one you look at, he was either a 4 or a 5-star. And I believe On3 had him as a top 60 player in the country coming out of high school. Was at Ohio State. I think him going into the transfer portal is more of the writing on the wall that Ohio State's either going to go to the portal to get a quarterback like they did this past year with Will Howard, or Julian Sand, another highly touted quarterback recruit, is going to be the heir apparent to Will Howard. But what Aaron Noland committing to South Carolina tells me is that maybe he is the heir apparent to Lenora Sellers. Now remember, Lenora Sellers, if he has another fantastic year, say he's a Heisman finalist, say he takes the step we all expect Lenora Sellers to take, he'll be draft eligible. Because the rule is you just have to be out of high school for 3 years. Lenora's redshirted the first year, had a breakout season this year, and if he continues that upward trajectory, I guarantee you NFL scouts will be foaming at the mouth to try to get him into the NFL draft. And if that's the case, then you maybe have your plan for the future, or at least a player who can compete to be the quarterback of the future with Cutter Woods, with Dante Reno behind him. We'll go take a quick break. When we come back, my man Jack Veltri from Gamecock Central joins the show. He's been at the Citrus Bowl practices. He'll tell us what he's seen, as well as preview this game and see what the roster looks like for next year as the postgame show continues. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell. The few accidents to get to you that are causing some issues on the roadways here this Friday afternoon, thankfully, only have 3 I'm looking at right now, and one is over in Irmo at Columbiana Drive at Lake Murray Boulevard. The other one being in Lexington County at Highway 6 near Highway 602 and Platte Springs Road over near Walmart, it looks like. And then lastly, we have one here in Richland County on Shop Road at Atlas Road. Continuing hour number 2 here on the post-game show, breaking down this Citrus Bowl matchup between South Carolina and Illinois, and they've had some on-site practices already to start the week. We'll go ahead and head out to our phone lines. I'm in Jack Veltri, as always, kind enough to join me on the program. Jack, appreciate you joining me. Are you enjoying Orlando so far?
Yeah, man, I definitely am. I appreciate you having me on for one. But, yeah, the weather's been great out here. It's nice to get out of the cold for a change. And I know we can't really complain about the cold because people from Illinois are probably dealing with feet of snow right now. But, yeah, it's been wonderful so far. And, day one of practice was today and all that. And, still got a long way to go with this trip. I'm really excited about it.
What are kind of the vibes that you get, when watching a bowl practice, especially this team too? Because I feel like the energy is really good around them right now in terms of players who could have easily not opted into this game. Players like Nick Emmanwori, like TJ Sanders, who could declare for the draft early, who I guarantee you will be draft picks, deciding to play in this game. Other players who will not be back here next year deciding to play in this game. Really, when it comes down to it, if you had told me that when we realized that you're going to play in the Citrus Bowl against Illinois, and not be in the playoff, that your only opt-outs are Kyle Kennard and Rocket Sanders, I would have been thrilled and would be through the roof about South Carolina's chances at getting win number 10. But how is it kind of looking at from a practice standpoint?
Yeah, and this is the thing, man. I think people forget, we're not out there in practice during the season. Like, the last time we saw this team in practice was all the way back in August during the early weeks of fall camp. Mm-hmm. And it's been a long time since then, and I think the vibes are exactly what you expect. They're really good. Obviously, like you said, the only 2 guys that were not there today that opted out are Rocket Sanders and Kyle Kennard. But other than that, everyone was there. Everyone was having a good time. You could just tell the guys were loose, getting ready during stretching and stuff, and then going into the real deal. It seemed good. And granted, we were only there for 15 minutes, but you could tell this is a team that is excited to be here and really hungry to get that 10th win. The vibes are good, like I said, and things are always better when you're winning. I haven't covered a bowl game like this before. I covered the Mayo Bowl a few years ago, but that was just game day itself. Being here in Orlando for this and getting to see the team practice and stuff, you can definitely tell they are very happy with where they're at right now.
Oh, yeah, because it's a fantastic opportunity still. I mean, this would be a historic season if they were to win the game. And telling you, Jack, I love their chances. The more I look at Illinois, the more I feel like South Carolina can kind of exploit those weaknesses. But what's kind of your initial reaction when looking at this Illinois team, looking at the results they've had this year and kind of breaking them down by the numbers?
They're very similar to South Carolina in a lot of ways. Number one, I think the most obvious thing is that they went 5-7 last year, just like South Carolina. Mm-hmm. And they turned their season around, or their team around in just a year, and now they're 9-3 with a chance to go get that 10th win. So right off the bat, they're very similar in that way to the Gamecocks. But the other thing is just that, with the Big Ten is so much different than the SEC in a lot of different ways. Obviously playing up north football is very different, I think, from playing in the South and all that. But you're going to get a lot of hard-nosed football, I think. You're going to get a team that is very physical in the trenches. But the good news for South Carolina is they play very similar in that way to Illinois. And then Luke Altmaier, the quarterback for Illinois, he won't have his best weapon out there with Pat Bryant, who's nearly a 1,000-yard receiver this season since he declared for the NFL draft and decided to opt out. But, Luke Altmaier, his story is pretty interesting in that he was the guy that filled in for Matt Corral, the Ole Miss quarterback, when the Rebels were in the Sugar Bowl a few years ago. And that was supposed to be Corral's, I think, final game in college. And he gets hurt and has to miss the rest of that game. And Altmaier's the guy who stepped in. And then, he was the Ole Miss, potential quarterback for the next season. And then Jackson Dart transferred in. So he's kind of the middle ground guy, the transitional point between two pretty good quarterbacks in Ole Miss's history. And then he transfers to Illinois, and the rest is history there. So there's a lot of things to like about this Illinois team. They're going to be a tough team to beat. But I think for South Carolina, you see the spread and stuff. It just makes sense. They're the better team, I think, this week. And I think they're really motivated to go out here and get this win in Orlando.
Yeah, definitely. And the thing I do like about Luke Altmaier, because before this segment, Jack, I was kind of talking about how confident I am with South Carolina and their chances to win this game. I do actually like Altmaier a lot. I mean, 21-5 touchdown INT ratio is pretty good. He takes care of the ball pretty well, and Illinois doesn't really shoot themselves in the foot a lot, so that's one thing that they got going for them pretty well. But when I look at the depth chart being released, obviously no Rocket Sanders, so the running back position is going to be divvied up between Oscar Attaway and Juju McDowell. You look on the defensive side of the ball, no Kyle Kennard, so those opposite edge duties we divvied up between guys like Gilbert Edmond, Desmond Umeozulu, J.T. Gear, Brian Thomas Jr. We'll start with the running backs first. What do you kind of expect to see with the offense and how it's going to change without Rocket Sanders and with Oscar Attaway and Juju McDowell taking those snaps?
Yeah, I think you see a lot because obviously Rocket has been the bulk carries guy for this team this year. Like, Oscar and Juju have been like the next guys up. I would say Oscar more so than Juju as that secondary running back. But now I think we're going to see a little bit of the carries split between Oscar and Juju. Like, I think Oscar is more than capable of being that lead running back, and so is Juju because they've both filled that role in the past, especially Oscar at North Texas when he was the guy getting over 100-plus carries for the last few years. But I think we could also see a little bit of a mixture of getting guys like Matthew Fuller and Jawarn Howell in this game. Because keep in mind, they're both going to be able to redshirt going into for next season because, or I should say redshirt for this season because they played in less than 4 games this year, and the bowl game doesn't count against them in that regard. So I think we're going to see a heavy dose of different guys in there at running back. But I do think we will probably see Oscar Attaway get most of the carries, and then you go from there with guys like Juju, who's in his last game after 4 years at South Carolina, and then maybe you get a little bit of a dose of the younger guys in there to see what they can do.
And then on the defensive side of the ball, too, I mean, anytime you lose the Nagurski Award winner, it's hard to replace, and that's going to be one thing that we talk about all offseason is how do you get that type of production from Kyle Kennard, that you got from Kyle Kennard out of the players that will be playing at that edge rushing position opposite of Dylan Stewart next season. It's going to be a burning question, but for right now, I mean, you got a slew of guys who seem very capable, but one's going to have to be able to take the jump. What do you kind of expect from that group that's going to be playing in that edge rushing spot opposite of Dylan Stewart?
Like Shane Beamer said during his media availability today, obviously Dylan Stewart is going to be lining up at one of the starting edge spots like he has been all year. And then the other spot, it's kind of, he didn't name like a guy or anything, but I think it's going to be a little bit of a combination of different guys going in there to get the job done. I think Brian Thomas Jr. makes the most sense as one of those starters in there. You could also see, like you said, you mentioned Gilbert Edmond, Des Yu, J.T. Gear's another guy that's listed on the depth chart here for South Carolina this week. There are a lot of different options you could go with that other edge spot. And I think we'll see a combination of a little bit of different guys getting in. Like, I think Brian Thomas Jr., if I had to make a guess, like, he's going to probably be one of the guys that is in contention for that starting edge spot next year. We'll see what else South Carolina does in the portal and stuff and who else they bring in. But I feel like Brian Thomas is a name that gets slept on a lot. And it wouldn't shock me if we saw him as one of those guys that really has that breakout game in the bowl game next week and really shines, and maybe that lifts him up for what he can do next season.
Certainly. And in terms of the portal, too, obviously some additions this week. Haven't gotten a chance to talk to you yet, so we got about a minute left here for you, Jack. What of the additions that they made in the portal so far do you think is going to be the most impactful for 2025?
I'll answer this in a different part. I would say like a 2-part answer to this, essentially, since we're running out of time. I think defensively, I really like the GBD defensive line addition from Texas A&M, and that is Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy. I'm really liking that. I think that's going to serve South Carolina really well in the trenches just because they need some guys in there. But I think long-term, and that's just for 2025, the long-term thing, Aaron Nolan's a name that I'm really excited about. Like Shane was asked about him a little bit today, and he seemed very excited about him, and I think he could be a nice prospect for the future as he's willing to, learn from Lenore Sellers and sit behind him for a year before, assumably, he takes over that role as the starting quarterback for 2026 and beyond. But we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. That's a very interesting spot, too, because I think it tells us a lot about what maybe the NFL thinks about Lenora Sellers, too. That's a whole other discussion. But, Jack, thanks as always for joining me, man. I look forward to seeing you down in Orlando here in about a day or two.
Yeah, looking forward to seeing you, buddy. Thanks so much.
Absolutely, man. Jack Veltri, at Jack T. Veltri on Twitter. And, of course, you can always follow his work at GamecockCentral.com. And, of course, the men's basketball team for South Carolina starts SEC play in just a few days as well. I'll tell you where I think they sit in the SEC hierarchy when the postgame show continues. All right. Squeeze in a little bit of basketball talk here because coming up here really soon, South Carolina is going to start conference play in what is definitely the toughest conference in college basketball, in terms of men's college basketball at least. The SEC and women's basketball is better this year. I will say, admittedly, in women's basketball, they'll be tougher for Dawn and her team this year to navigate SEC waters by the addition of Texas alone, right? I think they can probably split with Texas this year. Texas is pretty legit, and Tennessee shoots a ton of threes, makes a ton of threes, and play very fast, and they platoon swap in a way that not a lot of teams in college basketball do. Maybe outside of South Carolina, actually. Really fun to watch them play this year. It's going to be a little harder for Dawn in the group this year, but I still think that in terms of top to bottom strength, the SEC in men's basketball is the best in the nation. And it's going to be tough sledding. South Carolina had that tough loss to North Florida to start the year, an ugly loss. Thankfully for them, it's only a quad 3 for now. We'll see what North Florida does, and Carolina is going to be at North Florida's mercy to hopefully stay in that quad 3 loss. Quad 4s are almost eliminators if you're on the bubble, but the better North Florida does, the further entrenched into quad 3 territory that makes them. But the loss to Indiana, still quad 1 loss. Loss to Xavier, still justifiable. I think that one might end up being a quad 2 because Xavier's kind of struggled since then. But the win against Clemson in overtime was massive. They fought off a sluggish first half against Radford to ultimately win by almost 30 points. And Colin Murray-Boyles, being the best player on the floor, did what he did. 4 blocks the other day, too. I think that was one of my favorite parts about that stat line. 4 blocks, and they won a game by almost 30 in which they didn't shoot the ball well from 3. Promising. And they're so good at getting to the line. 27 free throw attempts in that game as well. But now it's time to look ahead to conference play, and it is a murderer's row for Carolina. Now, they do have a game on Monday against Presbyterian, and that's the last non-con game. But Saturday, January 4th, they'll have to go to Starkville and play Mississippi State, who is quietly one of the better teams in the country. They're 19th in KenPom. They are coming off a win against a Memphis team who I genuinely believe is one of the more talented in college basketball. Inconsistent, maybe, sure, but Memphis, who did beat Clemson on the road, is an incredibly talented team with some major wins, some impressive wins. And Mississippi State went to Memphis and held them to 66 points and won by 13. This is one of the more impressive wins that the SEC had as a conference. They obliterated Pittsburgh earlier this year. But, looking at Mississippi State earlier today, it made me wonder, how many wins can we see on this schedule for South Carolina in conference play? It's a loaded league. And I just wrote down a list of teams, and just it's basically a accumulation of numbers, an eye test of who are the best teams in the SEC, and I was going to, mark them 1 to 16. I think Auburn's the best team in the league right now, most complete team, offense and defense. They're probably the deepest team, too, and Janai Broome right now, if we ended the season, is the National Player of the Year. Tennessee at number 2, Alabama number 3, Florida at 4. Florida is not to be messed with. I know Todd Golden might not be the head coach by the end of the year because of some of the trouble he's gotten himself into off the court. But when I watch this Florida team, I am so amazed every time I watch them play at how fast they play with the ball. Walter Clayton Jr. is probably the second best player in the SEC right now. I still have Kentucky at 5. Yeah, Kentucky had they're coming off what is a ugly loss to an Ohio State team that is reeling, a bad loss. They got beat by 20 against an Ohio State team that was, reeling coming into that game. But I don't think they're going to shoot 4 for 22 every single game, right? They had a bad I kind of make that chalk it up to a bad shooting game. But the larger sample size to me tells me that Kentucky is a really good basketball team. I think that one's maybe more of an anomaly than anything else. Texas A&M at 6, maybe the toughest team in the league. If you haven't watched Texas A&M and you love tough basketball teams, highly suggest watching more of them. They beat Purdue earlier in the year, and Purdue, who I think is a top 3 or 4 team in the Big Ten, they beat them up. It was a masterclass on controlling the glass and playing tough defensively. That's a team in Texas A&M that if you just love tough basketball teams with great athleticism that play really hard on defense, that's a team for you. But Texas A&M at 6, Oklahoma at 7, a team I thought was going to be the worst team in the SEC this year, hasn't lost a game yet. So I don't know how I can rank them too low on just the basis of they haven't lost a game, and they have one of the more impressive wins that I've seen this year when they beat Michigan. A 4-point play in the last 10 seconds of the game helped them beat Michigan, a team that I think is one of the more impressive in college basketball too, or at least has one of the hardest offenses to have to guard. Oklahoma beat them. I got Texas at 8, Ole Miss 9, Mississippi State 10, Arkansas 11, Georgia 12, and I put South Carolina at 13. Even though the Gamecocks are last in all of the metrics on KenPom, I think their trajectory is better than some of the other teams that they're in the tier with, right? Georgia's pretty good. Arkansas's got a loaded roster. I don't trust John Calipari to be able to get it together for them to achieve what they're capable of doing. He's underachieved in January and February more than any coach in college basketball has recently. I don't think that's going to change at Arkansas magically. Missouri's really talented this year, but I think with Colin Murray-Boyles, I think they have a mismatch right there. South Carolina does whenever they play. It's going to be tough, man. Tough sledding in this league. It's the best league in the country. We'll see how they do come January. Final hour of the postgame show coming up. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell with only 2 accidents to get to you right now. They're causing some issues on the roadways. Thankfully, both of these are going to be here in Richland County. One in Irmo, it looks like, on Columbiana Drive at Lake Murray Boulevard. The other one looks like it is here in Richland County as well, but over at Shop Road at Atlas Road. Both of those causing some minor traffic backup, so avoid those if you can. But other than that, a pretty clean day on the roadways. Time for the 5 o'clock news. As always, brought to you by our friends at Integrated Media. They can help you with all your home entertainment needs. I know when I get into my new place here soon, I'm definitely going to be hitting them up for some assistance, helping set up my entertainment system. Some updates if you're watching, maybe Integrated Media helped you with your entertainment system and you've been watching college football today, like I've been doing. See, that's one of the best parts about days like today, as you get to chill out, have some college football, SEC college football being played starting at noon. Oklahoma took on Navy in the Lockheed Martin Armed Forces Bowl. Oklahoma jumped out to a 14-0 lead early in the game. Navy gets a touchdown right before halftime to cut it to 14-7. And then going into the second half, Oklahoma could do nothing offensively. Navy was able to get themselves back in the game, tie it back up at 14, ultimately take the lead 21-14 on a massive run. I'm trying to get the exact measurements on the run. Blake Horvath, the quarterback for Navy, who had a phenomenal day against Army in the Army-Navy game, had a phenomenal day today, 18 carries for 155 yards, 2 touchdowns. One of those was a 95-yarder. That's right, 95-yarder to take the lead, 21-14. Oklahoma scores with 6 seconds left. Michael Hawkins throws a touchdown pass with 6 seconds left. Oklahoma had the option to either kick the extra point and go to overtime or go for 2 and go for the win. And now normally, this is me editorializing here, I actually like when teams that are better on the field, look, the roster Oklahoma has is superior to Navy's, right? Even with backups, even with opt-outs, even with everything that goes into playing these bowl games, Oklahoma has a significantly better roster than Navy on any given year. And when you have those type of advantages, you need to use them, right? So I have no problem with Oklahoma going for 2 and the win. I would actually challenge anyone. I'd say that was actually the right decision, but Navy made a good adjustment. They called a timeout early before the snap. They were able to take advantage of that regrouping. They sacked Michael Hawkins on the 2-point conversion attempt, and lo and behold, Navy comes away with a 21-20 win. So they got the first win of the day. Right now in the Birmingham Bowl, Vanderbilt takes on Georgia Tech. Vanderbilt struck first. Georgia Tech scored a touchdown in the last hour. Vanderbilt matched that by marching right down the field, scoring a touchdown, and then Georgia Tech, running their 2-minute offense, isn't able to get into the end zone, but they're able to cap off their 2-minute drill drive with a field goal, and they are now heading to the half. So at the halftime break in Birmingham, Alabama, Vanderbilt has a 14-10 lead in a game that is probably the highest cumulative SAT and ACT game of any teams in the bowl games. But that one should be a pretty fun one in the second half as well. So those are our 2 bowl games right now. Got a whole lot more later on this afternoon. Once I get that pulled up, I'll be able to share with you what other games are on tonight in the world of college football in bowl season. That way, we'll be able to watch that on your entertainment system. Some other news from around sports. This coming in just right now, ESPN's Shams Charania, if I could get that out. Shams reports that the Kings reportedly fire Mike Brown, and this is just a year after he was named NBA Coach of the Year. They're off to a 13-18 start on the season. Not a great start for a Kings team that has a really good roster. But the Kings moving on from Mike Brown, and Mike Brown's not the first coach to get canned after winning the NBA Coach of the Year. Most notably, I think Dwayne Casey got fired the year he won NBA Coach of the Year. He won NBA Coach of the Year, and the Raptors fell short in the playoffs for the one of many times they fell short in the playoffs, and he ended up getting fired. But that one is, in terms of Coach of the Year awards that are seemingly meaningless every year, the NBA probably number one in that respect. But Mike Brown, the first coaching casualty of firing this season, he is out as the head coach of the Sacramento Kings. In terms of NFL injury news and notes, there was this is reported maybe within the last 30 minutes or so, but there will be no Jalen Hurts this week. Hurts is out with a concussion. For those who watched the absolutely thrilling game, I thought it was the best game from the NFL weekend, and better than the games that we saw either last night or on Christmas Day. Jalen Hurts and the Eagles lost to the Commanders in a thrilling fashion. Jaden Daniels threw a game-winning touchdown pass in the final minute of that one to give the Commanders a massive win. But in that game, and I want to say it was the second drive of the game, Jalen Hurts gets hit, falls down head first, gets is pulled off the field by the old eye in the sky. He's evaluated for a concussion. They determined he had one and didn't play the rest of the game. Kenny Pickett had to come in and play the rest of the game. He ended up getting dinged up as well, but the Commanders came away with the win, and now for the entire week, Jalen Hurts has been in concussion protocol, and it was announced today. Tim McManus, the ESPN staff writer, reports that Jalen Hurts will be out against the Dallas Cowboys here on Sunday. Quote, Hurts is still in protocol. It's going to be tough for him to make it this week, Nick Sirianni said, prior to the quarterback being officially ruled out. That is from Tim McManus' report. But Kenny Pickett should be able to go later on in this report. McManus mentions Pickett being injured, had a rib injury at the very end of the game after getting hit by Bobby Wagner. I'm sure my ribs would hurt too if I got hit by Bobby Wagner, but Kenny Pickett is expected to be able to play. And then Tanner McKee, a second or third year player, I believe, from Stanford, will assume the role as the number 2 quarterback behind Kenny Pickett. So the Eagles, who firmly cemented their spot in the playoffs, for the most part, I think they're pretty safe. I don't know if they've officially clinched their division, the NFC East, but I think they could have clinched it with a win on Sunday against Washington. Didn't do it, but they can clinch it with a win, I'm sure, against Dallas. But it's pretty much in hand. You know, they have it in hand, that division. But they're going to have to finish the year without Jalen Hurts. And, it's the last week of the year, or the next to last week of the year. Don't think they'll really need much of assistance to get into the playoff. And there's definitely still at least a good battle for the number 1 overall seed. But the news of the day in the NFL right now, no Jalen Hurts for the Eagles. So also if you're playing fantasy football, you probably want to set some make some lineup adjustments there as well. And some college/NFL news. Tennessee's running back, Dylan Sampson, who one of the big reasons why Tennessee was so flat offensively against Ohio State was that he only had 3 carries. He got hurt in the first half of that game, but that will end up being his final game in a Tennessee Vols uniform. He is entering the draft, declaring to forego his final year of eligibility at Tennessee and will go play in the NFL or attempt to get drafted. I think Mel Kiper has him as the 10th best running back in the draft, but a fantastic season for Dylan Sampson. Came into a pretty bad end whenever Ohio State beat the hell out of the Tennessee Volunteers in Columbus, and he got injured on his second carry of the game. Ultimately, I think he carried the ball one more time in the second half, but they actually had to start throwing the ball because he got down 21 points, but that is the last we'll ever see of Dylan Sampson in a Tennessee Vols uniform. Some other South Carolina news and notes as well. During the week, during the Christmas break here at 107.5 The Game, they were able to make some news and get some transfer portal additions. They add Aaron Noland, a former 4-star or 5-star quarterback, depending on which recruiting sites you subscribe to, from Ohio State. Quarterback will be here to presumably back up Lenora Sellers and maybe be the heir apparent to Sellers whenever he goes to the NFL or leaves, whatever comes first. But that was an interesting acquisition for South Carolina. I would say a transfer portal win for the Gamecocks. They also picked up a cornerback in Miles Norwood from Ball State. And then what I think is one of the more beneficial pickups in the transfer portal, they were able to get R.J. Newsome from Western Kentucky, an interior offensive lineman, a guard who played well over 700 snaps this year and had a pass blocking grade on Pro Football Focus over 81. So seemingly an ace at the position in pass protection is coming to South Carolina next season, presumably to fill the role of Kamar Bell or Torricelli Simpkins. Some other college football news as well. On 3, they report that linebacker Harold Perkins announced he will return for the 2025 season. He was in the transfer portal, and I guess the grass was not greener on the other side of the fence. Harold Perkins, who's been an interesting player for LSU, a guy who had a fantastic freshman season, playing primarily at the edge position, was then moved to middle linebacker for his sophomore season, had a very underwhelming year last year for an LSU defense that was atrocious. An LSU defense that kept Jaden Daniels, the Heisman Trophy winning quarterback and the best offense in college football, from being able to win more than 9 regular season games. That did not go very well for Perkins at that position. Then this year, that was kind of the big question mark for LSU coming into the season, right? Where are they using Harold Perkins? Is Blake Baker the new defensive coordinator for the Tigers going to put him back at the edge rushing position where he seemingly succeeded a whole lot more? Well, you didn't get a lot from him. Played only a handful of games this year before tearing his ACL and was out for the year pretty early on. But he entered the transfer portal and now has announced that he'll be coming back. So Harold Perkins will be back for a 4th season with the LSU Tigers. On3 also reporting that Jackson Dart has officially declared for the 2025 NFL Draft. Ole Miss's starting quarterback this year, who I believe was first team All-SEC in terms of honors at the end of the season. He is now declared for the draft. We'll see where he gets picked. I don't see him being a first-round pick. Really, outside of Shedeur Sanders, I think it's kind of a weaker draft class. Carson Beck didn't help himself out a lot this year. Of course, Beck will not be playing for the rest of the year for Georgia after he had to have surgery to repair some damage to his elbow. I believe it was a UCL. He had to repair some damage there, so he won't be playing. And presumably the next step for Beck is going to be the NFL draft. Didn't help his stock out a lot this year. Threw a lot of interceptions. There's not a lot of perfect prospects in this draft at the quarterback position. Quinn Ewers, I think, had up and down parts to his year this year too. But Jackson Dart might try to take advantage of that. He'll try to make his way into maybe those top 3 rounds, and we'll see where he ends up next year. And then, of course, 2 coaching hirings. I think I touched on one the other day. Michael Vick is going to be the head coach at Norfolk State. And then continuing our trend of HBCUs and hiring former NFL players, yesterday it was announced that former NFL wide receiver Deshaun Jackson of the Eagles, I believe played for the Redskins for a little bit too, the Raiders for a little bit, finalizing an agreement to become the next head football coach at Delaware State. So Delaware State and Norfolk State both making splashes by hiring former NFL players to be their head coach. Of course, like Michael Vick, Deshaun Jackson, no previous college football coaching experience or coaching experience at all. And lastly, here are the 5 o'clock news brought to you by Integrated Media. Miami head basketball coach Jim Larrañaga is stepping down. It was reported earlier yesterday that Larrañaga and the school were in talks with him stepping down. Now, they're in the midst of a 4-8 start to their season. Miami is 0-1 in ACC play. Not a great start. They underachieved last year as well, but it looks like Larrañaga will be stepping down from Miami, and they'll be on the lookout for a new head coach. This is just a year and a half or so removed from the Hurricanes making a Final Four run just a few years ago, where they lost to UConn in the Final Four. But no more Jim Larrañaga at Miami, a head coach who presumably, I don't think he's in the Hall of Fame right now, but I can assume he'll be in the Hall of Fame eventually, or at least he should be. Very few head coaches in college basketball have been able to take multiple schools to a Final Four. The coaches that have taken multiple schools to Final Four are usually do so at like blue blood programs, right? Like Rick Pitino took Kentucky and Louisville to a Final Four. You know, John Calipari took Memphis and Kentucky to a Final Four. A lot of coaches have taken multiple schools, or not a lot, a few coaches have taken multiple schools to the Final Four, but the collection of Jim Larrañaga schools he's taken to a Final Four were George Mason and Miami. So a decorated college basketball coaching career may be coming to an end. Based off of what his press conference sounded like, I don't think he'll be coaching anywhere else anytime soon. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll continue the discussion around South Carolina in the bowl game. We'll preview their Citrus Bowl matchup against Illinois coming up back here on the postgame show. Look, the holidays are past us now. Thanksgiving, Christmas are past us now. And I'm telling you, I ate a ton, right? My family's full of really good cooks. My girlfriend's family filled with really good cooks. And I has been spoiled this holiday season by eating a lot of good food. But now I got to get back to the grind, right? I got to drop some pounds, and I'm going to plan on doing so by going back to my friends at Columbia Secret for Weight Loss, who've done an amazing job at helping me lose weight in the past, right? When I first started with them earlier this year, I wanted to lose 15 to 20 pounds and get back closer to maybe my basketball playing weight and the weight I'm a lot more comfortable being. And then, of course, in a month's time, I reached that goal and did it easily without having to take any shots, having to take any pills, just great coaching and a program that put me in a position to be able to lose that weight quickly. And if you're in a similar position like I was and am right now, give them a call for your free consultation, 803-824-4210. Again, 803-824-4210 for Columbia Secret for Weight Loss. Well, unfortunately, we're not done with the 5 o'clock news because there was a tidbit of news that has since broken during the segment, and it's some unfortunate news. Seeing this now officially, On3 has tweeted about it about 5 minutes ago, and I'm seeing other reports coming in. Trey Wingo tweeted about it, so I've confirmed that it is officially news. It's not a hoax or anything like that. I saw a tweet, before the segment started, had to verify it. But the longtime CBS broadcaster, Greg Gumbel, a lot of us who we know as the voice of the NCAA selection show, has done a lot of play-by-play. One of the more prominent voices in sports over the last 35 plus years. It's been announced that he passed away today at 78 years old. I'll always remember Greg Gumbel as, being the guy who led the selection show, right? He hosted the selection show for the longest time and did an amazing job with it. And one of my favorite days of the sports calendar every year is the NCAA basketball selection show on CBS. They always do such an incredible job at getting to it, right? I think my biggest annoyance with the college football playoff selection show here this past year at ESPN was they took 21 minutes to finally start unveiling the list of teams that are going to be playing in that event. And Greg Gumbel, every year, man, they start the show. He would tell you that 32 teams get they get automatic bids to the NCAA tournament by winning their conference tournament, and that 36 teams are at-larges. And they go straight to it. He was a pro's pro. I'm definitely going to miss hearing Greg Gumbel's voice on Selection Sunday. I think Robbie Hummel put it really well on Twitter, and it was something that I've kind of thought about too when I was reading through a lot of this. And Robbie Hummel kind of mentioned that his voice doing this for so long gave it like the kid on Christmas feeling that you'd get when the NCAA tournament bracket was being unveiled. Sad day, sad news for CBS and the sports world at large. Greg Gumbel passing away at age 78. Also one thing I guess that is underrated about him was that he was also really good in the play-by-play booth. He could really deliver the action well. I was just scrolling through, Twitter during the break, seen a lot of people pay their respects and their tributes to Greg Gumbel. And one of the plays, and I forget that he called this game, was, I believe that was 2013 or 2012 when Peyton and the Denver Broncos were hosting the Baltimore Ravens. Joe Flacco throws that absolute bomb to Jacoby Jones, scores a touchdown, and it was just an electric call, too. It was an electric play to win that game and an incredible call from Greg Gumbel to be able to bring you that action. He was as good as a play-by-play voice as he was a studio host. Of course, known for being a great studio host, but he could do play-by-play too. He could do it all. So rest in peace to one of the biggest broadcasting giants in the industry. Again, for those who haven't seen it, Greg Gumbel from CBS Sports passed away today at age 78. So we're thinking about him and his family this afternoon. A tough loss for the sports world. Tough to pivot from that. No one likes to receive bad news, but had to make sure that was official before I decided to read that as a part of the 5 o'clock news this afternoon. But we'll go ahead and pivot to the South Carolina Gamecocks. Big game on the 31st on New Year's Eve. Ed Bird, what day is New Year's Eve this year? That's Tuesday, right? Tuesday, yeah. See, never good. At this time of the year, I don't know days by Monday through Friday. I know them by the number on the calendar. But on Tuesday, South Carolina is going to take on Illinois for a chance to get win number 10, which should be a fun matchup, an exploitable matchup for South Carolina. In terms of looking at impact losses for the game, South Carolina officially without Kyle Kennard and Rocket Sanders. Illinois without Pat Bryant, leading wide receiver who is entering the transfer portal. Jack Veltri joined me earlier in the show to kind of break that game down and discuss those losses. And I'm with Jack. I think the edge rush position is going to be an interesting one to watch for in this game. Now, Dylan Stewart's going to be playing for the Gamecocks, and I expect him to have an incredible day. Illinois' got a good offensive line, but they have struggled at times in pass protection. Specifically at one position, tackle Melvin Priestley has had an up-and-down year, was a transfer from Grambling State. But I think that is going to be the weak link that South Carolina can identify in this game in terms of maybe pressuring Luke Altmaier. Luke Altmaier's had a really solid season. Not a Heisman Trophy winning season, by any means. But when you look at this Illinois team, Luke Altmyer does a really good job of taking care of the football. He's only thrown 5 interceptions this year. He's been able to throw for 21 touchdowns. So he's been productive. And, of course, having Pat Bryant has helped out a lot. That was his go-to target. Him and Zachary Franklin at the receiver position accounted for 105 of the team's 200 completions. So over half of the completions this team's had this year has come to 2 different players, right? They rely a lot on those 2 guys. So Illinois is going to have some question marks to answer when it comes to who they're going to throw the ball to. But when you look at Luke Altmyer this year, for the most part, protected. He's been under pressure for 37.6% of his dropbacks, and teams have decided to blitz Illinois a lot. Luke Altmyer has been blitzed on 43.6% of his dropbacks, pressured on 37.6% overall. But when he is pressured, he can make some mistakes. If you look at just his overall grades on Pro Football Focus, when he is kept clean in the pocket, his pass grade is at 86.7. When he's been under pressure, that dips to 48.8. And he's thrown for 9 turnover-worthy plays in those. 5.7% of his throws when under pressure were considered turnover-worthy. Now, technically didn't throw any interceptions when under pressure, but has been prone to put the ball in harm's way. I don't think I don't know. I look at this offensive line, and I just don't see them being able to protect Altmyer in this game, because when you look at some of the games against their best pass rushing units in the Big Ten, Altmyer was on the run a little bit more, especially that aforementioned tackle, Melvin Priestley, who's given up almost 20 pressures this year, and a bulk of those have come in 3 games: Penn State, Michigan, Rutgers. And according to Pro Football Focus, Michigan's the only team with a higher pass rush grade this year than South Carolina. And Michigan was able to hang tough in that game. Illinois still won. For those who don't remember, that was the game Illinois won those really cool throwback uniforms, the Red Grange throwback uniforms. They were able to win that game, but Michigan was able to get a lot of pressure on Altmyer. Penn State held Illinois to 7 points. And a lot of that came from their ability to rush the passer and create some havoc and make Luke Altmyer have to scramble a little bit. But that's going to be the big matchup. And even though you lose Kyle Kennard, and as great as Kennard was this year, as he was easily one of the 3 or 4 best defensive players in all of college football, if not the best, you still have a lot of talent there. I still feel really good at with Desmond Umeozulu, JT Gear, Gilbert Edmond, Brian Thomas Jr. Jack mentioned Brian Thomas Jr. is a guy who can come in next year and really be a contributor as the edge rusher opposite Dylan Stewart. Like, South Carolina is so deep at that position that I think they're going to be able to fill in the gap of Kyle Kennard easier than Illinois can, maybe at the receiver position. And that's going to be a big thing. I think ultimately South Carolina won the battle of opt-ins and opt-outs in this game. I think that's where this game is ultimately going to be decided. We'll go ahead and take a quick break. When we come back, we will do a drive around the SEC, discuss some of the bowl games that have happened earlier today. Oklahoma took on Navy in the Lockheed Martin Armed Forces Bowl. Vanderbilt currently in a battle with Georgia Tech in the Birmingham Bowl, and some other bowl games going on tonight involving SEC teams that we'll get you ready for when the postgame show returns. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell. The few accidents to get to you that are causing some issues here on the roadways in the Midlands this afternoon. We'll start off with the one that's in Richland County. We do have an accident on Columbiana Drive at Lake Murray Boulevard. That one's caused a minor traffic backup for about the last hour or so. We have a couple of new ones that have popped up. Both of them are going to be in Kershaw County. One's over on Highway 1 at Augusta Road at Ridgeway Road. And the last one's going to be at I-20 westbound, just before US 601 over near exit 92. Time to take a drive around the SEC. It's bowl season. We're starting to see some SEC teams take on other opponents in bowl action. Vanderbilt is currently playing in a bowl game right now at the beginning of the year. I think we would have all been stunned to see that be the case. But Vanderbilt is indeed playing in a bowl game right now. They are currently leading Georgia Tech 14-10 or 14-13, I believe. About to set up for a field goal here. Georgia Tech makes this, then they will cut it to 1. So they're lining up for it right now. But earlier today, Oklahoma took on Navy in the Lockheed Martin Armed Forces Bowl, and it did not go very well for Oklahoma. Started off pretty good. In the first quarter, they scored 2 touchdowns pretty early, hop out to a 14-0 lead, but Navy quarterback Blake Horvath ran all over the Sooners. 18 carries for 155 yards, 2 touchdowns, including a 95-yard touchdown run, which I think tied the game. And then they took the lead late in the game to go up 21-14 with a touchdown. And then Oklahoma had the ball, I believe, with 2 minutes left. Navy had to punt. Oklahoma had 2 minutes left. Ran a really impressive 2-minute drill. Was able to score a touchdown with 6 seconds left to make it 21-20. They had the option to either go for 2 for the win or go for 1 and go into overtime, which we have seen some wild overtime games in college football this year. Some absolutely bonkers overtime events, and including the 5 overtimes in the Hawaii Bowl between South Florida and San Jose State that South Florida won in. And then there were 6 overtimes in the game yesterday, that bowl game that's played in Detroit between Toledo and Pitt. Toledo beat Pitt in 6 overtimes. Side note, a lot of people take a dump on the overtime rules. I kind of like them a little bit. Now, I felt like I had to thoroughly explain all of that to my family on the night of Christmas Eve when we were all watching that game, having to explain, nope, by 3 overtimes, we got to do the 2-point conversions. But it was fun. It was exciting. And even if you have no dog in the fight, I think those have become really interesting games once you do get in that little 2-point conversion shootout, especially in a bowl game. That's when it gets a lot of fun. But they avoided those extra overtimes by just trying to end the game right there. Navy was able to sack Michael Hawkins and make sure that he didn't get a pass off into the end zone. Navy pulled off the 21-20 upset of Oklahoma. Oklahoma ends their season at 6-7. Not a great season for Brent Venables in Oklahoma. Easily one of the more disappointing teams in the SEC. I'd put them up there with Kentucky. Kentucky may be a little more disappointing in terms of expectation and what they ended up being. But this is another year, the second year for Brent Venables, where he finishes the season under 500 after a bowl game loss. So we'll see exactly what his future is like moving forward. He'll be back next year. And I think Oklahoma even did they have given him the vote of confidence to continue coaching even after next year. But it can't be very comfortable there in Norman right now. In the Vanderbilt-Georgia Tech game, that field goal is good. So Georgia Tech trails Vanderbilt 14-13. Commodores have the ball now with 7:42 left in the third quarter. That is in the Birmingham Bowl being played right now. And, man, that'd be a big win for Vanderbilt to end their season over 500. A 7-6 year for a Vanderbilt team that, if we just go back and look at the beginning of the year, I think most Vegas sports books had their over-under for the win total at 2.5. Team that went 2-10 last year, a fun turnaround. They came back this year and upset Virginia Tech to start the season. Had an ugly loss at Georgia State. People forget about that. They lost to Georgia State earlier this year, but they lost to Georgia State. They gave Missouri all they could handle. They beat Alabama in what's one of the more memorable events or memorable games and moments of the college football season, and Diego Pavia became one of, I guess, America's favorite players and America's scrappiest underdogs in the sport for a while. But for them to go 7-6 is a big step for that program, and I think Jay Phillips and I joked earlier this year, whenever Clark Lee was, named the SEC Coach of the Year, that it was mostly maybe it was hey, thanks for keeping Alabama out of the playoff, and hey, we'll give you an award because Vanderbilt wasn't really bad this year, like they were supposed to be. But that would be a big win for Vanderbilt. They're currently up 1. They're driving a little bit. They got the ball almost to their own 30. They just got a first down. But Vanderbilt playing right now. We have 2 SEC games going on tonight at 7 o'clock. On ESPN after this Vanderbilt-Georgia Tech game. Arkansas will take on Texas Tech in the Liberty Bowl. Arkansas does have one big opt-out, and that's linebacker Landon Jackson, who NFL caliber talent. I think Landon Jackson's performance against Tennessee was one of the more impressive that you'll see, one of the more impressive individual efforts you'll see from a linebacker this year. And I think that was the main reason Arkansas was able to pull that upset, was because Tennessee could not do anything on offense in that game in Fayetteville earlier this year. But Jackson will not be playing in the bowl game. Now, quarterback Talon Green, I did see on their depth chart that they released earlier in the week. Texas Tech, I feel like I think they're mostly at full strength, but interesting game right there. I think I'm giving the nod to Texas Tech on this one. I think the loss of Jackson might be a little too big. Texas Tech can score the ball a little bit. Their quarterback Morton is thrown for a little over 3,000 yards this year and 27 touchdowns. And most importantly, running back Taj Brooks for Texas Tech, 1,500-yard rusher this year with 17 touchdowns. He was one of the better offensive players in the Big 12. I just don't know if they're able to stop Brooks in this game, assuming Brooks plays. I've not seen their depth chart, but I assume Brooks will be playing in this game. And then later on tonight at 10:30, so hopefully you're all staying up late for this one, in the Las Vegas Bowl. I think I said Holiday Bowl earlier in the show, erroneously. They will not be playing in the Holiday Bowl. This is in the Las Vegas Bowl. Southern Cal and Texas A&M will be playing on ESPN once Texas Tech and Arkansas goes final in Allegiant Stadium in Vegas, where Southern Cal started their season with an upset win against LSU, and it looked like that Southern Cal team was going to maybe be a contender in the Big Ten. You beat LSU, an improved LSU defense, and always LSU's offense works pretty well, very well functioning. Figured that would be the sign of a good season for Southern Cal, but they went on to finish the season 5-6 after that game. Southern Cal trying to get a win to salvage a little bit of respect. There'll be no Miller Moss in this game. He is currently in the transfer portal. Texas A&M, for the most part, pretty good in terms of opt-ins and opt-outs. I expect Marcel Reed to have a field day against the Southern Cal defense. I like Texas A&M to win rather handily in this game. I don't think it should be that close unless Woody Marks goes crazy for Southern Cal. But, I mean, Brett Venables at Oklahoma, 2 6-7 seasons in 3 years. Lincoln Riley is about to have another bad season, or bad finish to a season at Southern Cal. This will be his worst year. If they lose, they'll be 6-7. History's not going to remember kindly Lincoln Riley leaving Oklahoma for Southern Cal, and how Oklahoma replaced him might not be looked at kindly either after their loss earlier today. Florida is the only SEC team that has played in a bowl game before Christmas was Florida. They whooped up on Tulane pretty handily, 33-8. And then, of course, over the weekend, Texas beat Clemson 38-24 to advance in the college football playoff. And then Ohio State took a sledgehammer to Tennessee. That was 21-0 before anybody could blink. And ultimately, it ended up 42-17 Ohio State. So they advanced to take on Oregon, which is going to be a hell of a football game. That's going to be in Pasadena. And for those who are fans of the traditional Rose Bowl format, of the old Pac-12 playing the winner of the Big Ten, or even before that, the old winner of the Big Ten playing the winner of the Pac-10, back when the Pac-10 had 10 teams, and back when every year it was just those two conference winners playing in the Rose Bowl every year, well, we get a little bit of a treat, a nice little throwback of a traditional Pac-10 team playing a traditional Big Ten team in the Rose Bowl, but this time it's for the chance to play in the college football semifinals. On Monday, Missouri will play Iowa in the Music City Bowl. And then, of course, Tuesday, as we all know, Carolina takes on Illinois in the Citrus Bowl. Alabama will play Michigan in the ReliaQuest Bowl. And then LSU that night will take on Baylor in the Texas Bowl. We'll go ahead and break down the matchups for the SEC teams that are still in the playoff. That includes Texas taking on Arizona State in Atlanta and Georgia taking on Notre Dame in New Orleans. We'll do that as we round out today's show coming up next. Final segment here on the post-game show. I'm Elijah Campbell. As you could tell, there's no Jay Phillips today. But big shout-out to my man Ed Bird behind the glass, who's making sure I don't violate any SEC violations. Easier said than done. And keep me a little bit company here in the studio, running the soundboard, doing a fantastic job. It's been so lonely in the studio today before Ed Bird came. It was a ghost town in this building. But I'm glad I could be here with you, be back from break, and be able to talk some sports with you leading into another big sports weekend, an even bigger sports week, including the South Carolina Gamecocks taking on Illinois in the Citrus Bowl on Tuesday. And if you're interested in wanting to go to the game or like a chance to maybe try to win tickets, you got to listen in on Monday. So Monday morning in the early game. I don't know when it's going to be in the early game. I was not given a time of when this would be. So it makes me warning you a little trickier. But I was told today by those in charge, Terry Ford, that we will be giving away a pair of tickets to the Citrus Bowl in Orlando on Tuesday. And we're giving those out on the early game on Monday's show. And, of course, for those who don't listen to this station every day, that runs from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. So tune in, listen in for a cue to call or whatever they're going to do, whatever method they're going to do to give away these tickets. Listen in for that, and you could possibly win a pair of tickets to the game. And if you don't go to the game, you're watching at home, but you would like, to maybe win some money, then you should enter our Lawyer Lisa Special Teams contest. Just go to 1075thegame.com, enter in. It's going to be on the homepage, not hard to find. On the little, moving window on the home screen, you'll see where you can enter in the contest. And if South Carolina scores a special teams touchdown, block kick touchdown, fake field goal touchdown, the last time South Carolina was in a bowl game, I believe they scored on a special teams play. They did have a special teams touchdown. And if that's the case, that happens, then you can win $1,200. That's what the pot's at right now. But again, you can't win if you don't enter. So you can enter in for a chance to win there. And then after the Gamecocks play Illinois on the next day, we will have two SEC teams playing in the college football playoff quarterfinals. Texas will play Arizona State in Atlanta. Notre Dame will play Georgia in New Orleans. Now, the Texas analysis here I can keep short and sweet. I think they'll beat Arizona State by about 21 points. Texas might be the most complete team in college football. I love Oregon. Defensively, they could be a little suspect on the back end from time to time. And teams have been able to run on Oregon at times this season. Ohio State, not as vulnerable as I thought they were, but gettable. Texas seemingly is ungettable unless they play Georgia. But Texas in this game is much better players. An offense that will score, that can score on anybody. The thing with Texas is, though, can they score and they get in the red zone? They did against Clemson. They finished drives against Clemson because they ran the ball all over them. Clemson sometimes has a hard time stopping the run, and Texas made sure that they exploited that matchup pretty well. And they ran for a ton of yards. Wisner had a hell of a day on the ground, and so did Jaden Blue. Both Texas running backs were able to get what they wanted to on the ground. I think they'll do the same against Arizona State. I love Cam Skattebo. But Arizona State's coming into this game without wide receiver Jordan Tyson, who was their leading receiver and was their leading receiver by a mile. Had a significant chunk of the targets and the catches on that Arizona State team. And it's really impressive that Arizona State was able to win that Big 12 title game against Iowa State without him. But Cam Skattebo, I think, is the second best running back in the country, so it'll be a challenge for Texas to stop him. I think they do. The big game, though, will be at 8:45 on ESPN when Notre Dame plays Georgia. It's announced Carson Beck isn't going to play. He had surgery to repair his elbow that he injured on the last play of the first half of the SEC championship game. So Gunnar Stockton has to make his first start of the year against one of the best defenses in all of college football. A Notre Dame defense that's top 3 in scoring on a per-game basis. A Notre Dame defense that is 3rd in the country in coverage grade on Pro Football Focus. A Notre Dame defense that for most of the game kept Indiana out of the end zone. They bent a little bit at times. They didn't break, and they forced some turnovers. This is a Notre Dame defense that is one of the better ones in the country with a coach who is an incredible defensive mind. A coach in Marcus Freeman, who I think some people forget was the architect of that Cincinnati defense that ultimately ended up helping take them to the playoff. He wasn't the play caller that year, the year Cincinnati went to the college football playoff. but he built the foundation as the defensive coordinator years prior. Notre Dame's really good, man. I'm not saying Georgia can't beat Notre Dame, because as long as Kirby Smart is coaching the Georgia Bulldogs, they're going to have a chance to win any game they play, because Kirby Smart is one of the gold standards in college football. And, of course, he's going to have a slight underdog angle, even though I still think Georgia's favored in this game, even without Carson Beck. But he is going to try to find as many clips as possible of people talking about Notre Dame's defense and playing it to his team, saying no one believes in you, even though most of the country actually does believe in Georgia. I think I actually am in the minority here when it comes to picking Notre Dame to beat the Georgia Bulldogs. I think I am in the minority there. This Notre Dame team is really, really good. But that game, whatever the over-under is, I don't know what it is. Looks like it's 43.5 according to ESPN Bet. If you're into that sort of thing, take the under. The big factor in that, can Riley Leonard do enough to win Notre Dame the game? We'll see. Thanks for listening today. I'm Elijah Campbell. He's Ed Bird behind the glass. Enjoy your weekend. We'll see you again on Monday. From the WIS Traffic Studios, I'm Elijah Campbell. The few accidents to get to you that are causing some issues here in the Midlands this Friday afternoon. We're going to start with one in Lexington County. This one's just been reported in the last 10 to 15 minutes or so. Over at Barr Road at Richard Bonham Drive, some minor traffic backup there. In Richland County, accident reported on Harbison Boulevard near I-26. It's over between Columbiana Drive and Park Terrace Drive. That one's also been reported here in the last couple of minutes. Some minor traffic backup is building up there as a result. And lastly, we have an accident over on Highway 1. That's over at Augusta Road at Ridgeway Road.